What's going on, 7th graders? This is Mr. Williams from Southern Guilford, and today we'll be talking about argument writing, all right? Title for the lesson today is, What Would You Do? So here's some materials that you're gonna need for today's lesson, all right? You're gonna need a pen or pencil, highlighter if possible, and lastly, you'll need the text, Putting Good Deeds in Headlines May Not Be So Good. Now, you may or may not have it, your teacher may have provided it for you, but if you don't have it, it's all right. Course outline, here's what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about what an argument is, right? We're going to read an argument passage. We're going to also identify what good and bad deeds are. We're going to talk about the pros versus the cons, and lastly, the elements of the argument framework. Student goals. After this lesson, you'll be able to point out structures of an argument text as well as identify both sides of the argument. You'll also be able to delineate the argument's specific claim, including its relevance. It means whether it's important or not, right? Lastly, here are some standards that we're going to do, R5 and R8. All right, let's take a look at some vocabulary words that we're going to use today. Pique, which means to stimulate interest or curiosity. Something can pique your interest, just in a little example. Beget, to give rise to or to result. Let's dive right in, all right? We're talking about argument. Now, we're not talking about the argument between you and your little siblings, right? We're talking about arguments within the text, okay? So, an argument refers to a person taking a stance on something, okay? It could be anything. As long as you're taking a stance, that's what an argument is. In writing, though, arguments are more tailored to issues rather than just a regular argument. And we'll take a look at an example a little bit later. So today we're going to read a text that has to do with good deeds. So in order for us to really understand the text in its entirety, we first have to look at what good deeds are. So here are some examples of some good deeds. Finding money and returning it. I've had that experience. I'm sure some of you might have had the same thing. Lending a helping hand to the elderly, walking someone across the street, great thing. Chipping in to help a peer in need. I've seen that plenty of times as a teacher. I have some wonderful students, so you guys do that a lot. I definitely see that. So now we're getting an idea of what to look forward to as we read the text. So today we'll be reading a text that is called Putting Good Deeds in Headlines May Not Be So Good. Off gate, I'm thinking, okay, good deeds won't be good? What's going on with that, okay? Let's take a look. So if your teacher provided you with this text, now is a perfect time for you to dive right in, all right? So pause the video now, take a look at it. We'll come back in about 5 or so minutes, all right? Okay, now that you guys have read the text, let's take a look a little closer at paragraphs 1 and 2. We're going to talk a little bit and identify certain deeds that have been done, all right? So let's read it together just a little bit. An online collection has raised more than $145,000 for a man who stumbled onto a pile of money and turned it over to the police. Glenn James' story of a good deed is just one of many making headlines. It may not be exactly brand new, but public interest does seem to be piqued these days by ordinary folks making what are seen as extraordinary ethical decisions. Some, however, questioning if airing this kind of good news is actually good. A series of good deeds. James's story, he's the homeless man in Boston who turned in a backpack filled with $42,000, went viral. So did another recent story about a Dairy Queen manager from Minnesota who stood up for a blind man who didn't know he'd been robbed. The blind man dropped a $20 bill and a woman picked it up and pocketed it. The manager threw her out of the restaurant and then handed the man $20 from his own pocket. Just a few weeks before that, stories swirled about 4 college football players who found themselves inside a store that was accidentally left unlocked. Instead of just taking what they wanted, they left every penny they owed at the checkout. One television report called it a story of honesty that's become a shining beacon of righteousness. There are lots of people who suffer from moral myopia. And so when you see this good happening, it renews some of your faith, says University of Texas professor Mimi Drumright. She says these are the types of stories you hope will inspire copycats. The reports of these good deeds probably are going to beget more good deeds, and that is a good thing. Let's take a look at some of the good deeds that we've read. So if you have your highlighted with you, go ahead and pull it out. We're going to highlight a couple of things. All right? So in paragraph 1, it immediately talks about a man who stumbled upon a pile of money and turned it over to the police. So let's highlight that. Okay, let's recognize another one. So let's take a look at the second sentence. So the second sentence actually has the word peaked in it. I don't know if you recognize that. Did you see that? Hopefully you did. So that sentence reads, it may not be exactly brand new, but public interest does seem to be peaked these days. Elevated. That's how we can use that using something called context clues. We already know that. All right, so let's keep moving. So let's talk about this man from Dairy Queen, the manager. What does the text say about him? So another recent story about a Dairy Queen manager from Minnesota who stood up for a blind man who didn't know he'd been robbed. So let's highlight that. Okay. It goes on to say that he dropped some money and someone actually picked it up. I mean, how many times have you seen that? Would you actually do that? The title of this lesson is actually called, Would You Do It? So I want to know, would you pick up that money and give it back to them? It's actually something that you really think about often. When you see someone drop some money, do you pick it up? Do you return it? Something to think about, all right? Here's another one. Just a few weeks before that, stories swirled about 4 college players who found themselves inside a store that was accidentally left unlocked. Instead of just taking what they wanted, they left every penny they owed at the checkout. So let's highlight that. So if you notice while we were reading the text, the author refers to someone that gave direct, specific information. That person is Mimi Drumright from the University of Texas. Okay? Why is she so important? She's important because she is what we call credible, right? She's a college professor from the University of Texas, and her opinions matter. All right, so we always have to be sure, we always have to make sure that we account for these credible sources. All right. Lastly, let's talk about our other vocabulary word, beget. I think I see it in the last sentence. Let's read it. The reports of these good deeds probably are going to beget more good deeds, and that is a good thing. So as we explicate the text or pull out from the text, what we're identifying are key points to us understanding the author's argument. So now is the time for you to grab your pencil and your pen. Now I want you to write down some pros and some cons that the author makes throughout the text. Pause your video now, and I'll see you back in about 4 to 5 minutes. All right, we're back. Let's see how you guys did. Here's what I came up with. Here's some pros. Paying it forward, which means if someone pays for your meal, you pay for someone else's meal. That actually would be a great thing because I'm kind of hungry right now. All right. So receiving more than you give. Sometimes when you do a good deed, others will do good deeds for you even more. Right? And lastly, fame and praise. Now, most people don't do it for that, but depending on what you do, it can come. Who knows, right? Let's talk about some cons, all right? Some people may downplay it. They may say it's not that big of a deal. He just gave some money to the homeless. Not a big deal, right? All right. It suggests a superior mentality. Sometimes when you do a good deed, others may think you're just trying to be better than them. Maybe. Lastly, it sends a dangerous message. In the text, it talks about when you deem something that is supposed to be a normal activity as something that's extraordinary, it can be quite dangerous, and it can send a dangerous message. So now that we identified and we looked at the text, we pulled out some things, we talked about the pros and the cons, let's now build this argument structure. Let's break down the structure of this argument. We first have the introduction, which has the hook, and it also introduces the argument and makes the claim. We have next the evidence, which is the writer providing the facts and cites from where it's from. We also have support. Support refers to the evidence, okay? Lastly, we have the conclusion, which restates the claim. Okay, guys, so I know you've probably seen this framework before, the elements of argument, but we're gonna use it again. So if you have this, if your teacher has provided it for you, go ahead and take it out. If you don't have it, it's okay, because we're gonna use it, we're gonna write on it today, all right? Let's talk introduction, specifically as it relates to the text, okay? Introducing the topic, stating the opinion, all right. Our author for this particular essay, or this particular argument, did not use a claim within the introduction, but what he did was, they used it at the end. So if you're referencing the text, if you look at the last sentence in the last paragraph, you will see the author shows us here what the argument actually is that he or she believes. Let's read it together. Giving Good Samaritans celebrity treatment may also have the unintended consequence of creating monster expectations, kind of like a kid expecting a prize every day that he's not late for school. You have to be careful not to go overboard, as one expert put it. But celebrating people for doing the right thing is still the right thing to do. So let's highlight that really quick. Okay, so now we know where the author stands on this argument. So guys, let's talk introduction. In the text, the author introduces the topic. The topic is good deeds, okay? Now we have to analyze and figure out what the author says about these good deeds. Now the title kind of leaves us in limbo. Are good deeds being posted a good thing or a bad thing? What does the author say? He says they are a good thing, as we referenced in the previous slide. Let's talk about the support. Okay? The author does give evidence and supports that evidence within the text as to why good deeds are necessary to be broadcasted. We already talked about these three things in the pros versus the cons. So let's take a look again. Paying it forward, receiving more than you give, fame and praise. These are three things that the author says about good deeds being broadcasted, being a good thing. Lastly, our conclusion. So all we're doing in our conclusion is we're restating the opinion, or we're restating what the claim actually is. And the claim is simply celebrating people for doing the right thing is still the right thing to do. This is what the author believes. He gave the evidence in the previous slide, and now we have our conclusion. So 7th grade, let's wrap things up. Today, we talked about a couple of different things. We read an article, we analyzed the text, we pulled some things out, some pros, some cons. We even used an argument framework. Then after that, we talked about the intro, the support, evidence, and also the conclusion. So all in all, just want to let you guys know, this lesson is not just for today. You're going to need this later on. You're going to need it in 8th grade, 9th grade. You're going to need it when you're arguing with your mom or your sister or your little brother. You're going to need this information. So lastly, have fun hanging out with you guys. I will see you next time.